College football nerds here talking Georgia and LSU SEC championship game. Got Josh here with me. We're going to get nerdy. We're going to talk through this game a little bit. There's some interesting discussion points because obviously LSU stubbed their toe last week. We're going to talk about that. But first, give us your score prediction in the comments. Like, subscribe. If you have seen a few videos from us and you haven't subscribed, please do so. And also, as a reminder, if you want to help us out, you could always share us where you talk football, forums, Facebook, whatever. All right, Josh, I want to start. We're obviously going to talk about the elephant in the room with LSU losing to A&M last week, but I want to start this on the Georgia side. And we were talking about some statistics before we got going. And one of the things I noticed when I was putting together the info card for their resume is that Stetson Bennett's thrown a lot this year. And it's a little bit of a removal from last year in that last year he was hyper efficient, 10 yards an attempt. This year he's thrown like 80 more attempts than he did all of last year, and all of last year includes the SEC championship game, 2 playoff games, that sort of thing. Last year he had 30 attempts in 2 games. This year he's already done it 8 times, and that average has dropped down to 8.6. Talk about what's going on with the Georgia offense, what they're doing, why they're throwing the ball so much more than they have in the past, and is that a potential concern for this Georgia Bulldogs offense?
It's interesting because last year on the season they threw 407 times. This year they threw 401. They actually in 2022 already have 270 completions versus 264 last year with 3 more games. But even with fewer completions, they actually had about 300 yards more passing than they do this season. And I think it speaks to how much more they're depending on the pass, the way that the pass and the run are linked. I think the receiving core is a little better this year on the whole, especially with the maturation of the tight ends, Darnell Washington being healthy. But it's not equating to the same yardage. And last year, I think they had so much more going with a run, they didn't have to throw much. But when you do run the ball well, your pass game gets much more effective. We saw that in the Michigan-Ohio State game. Michigan fans, plug your ears, but the reality was JJ wasn't really throwing the ball great in that game. But he was throwing for a ton of yardage because they had guys open behind the defense for huge chunk plays. That's kind of where Georgia was a season ago. This year, they're actually having to pass to run the offense on a frequent basis. And it really it looks very, very different. And, I think there are a lot of factors with that. I already mentioned, the receivers. I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that they gain a lot of trust in Stetson Bennett and his ability to be efficient moving the offense. I think there's a lot to be said, too, about where the offensive line's at, the trust they have offensively, the trust Monken has in his scheme, the amount of balance they're trying to build. I actually kind of laud them for it because I think in the SEC championship game, they went into that game trying to do the same thing they'd done where they'd been playing Anaconda football all year last year, and they kind of got punked a little bit. And in the playoffs, they came back and they said, look, we're going to be a lot more aggressive, and they benefited from it. This year, they've kept that aggression, and they've kept it all year. But I do think it's interesting that not only are they throwing the ball a lot more, but as you've said, it's coincided with a significant decrease in the per-play production, and the total yardage they're getting out of the completions has gone down, actually. And they're going to end up with more yards than they did last season, but not a whole lot more, despite throwing the ball more. So, yeah, there's definitely some, give and take balance issues, I think some sort of side effects of losing some tailbacks from last season. They've still got really good ones this year. I'm not saying they're bad, but they just had such a multi-headed monster last season, and they don't have that this year. So it's a little more, I think people are a little more keyed on defending the pass than they were.
So I'm going to kind of turn it around and have the same or similar question about LSU, who's struggling even more in the pass game. And I do agree with your point. And we like to talk about yards per play and yards per carry, yards per attempt a lot more than total yardage, because a lot of times that imparts, some insights on effectiveness. I agree with you that when you have a good running game, that yards per attempt number from your quarterback is usually pretty high. I mean, to the extreme example, think about triple option teams, old Georgia Tech teams. They would have, 80 yards passing, but it'd be like 12, 13 yards per attempt, because when you finally do pass or when everybody's having a sellout for your run, you get some chunk yardage, which makes this next question a little interesting or vexing to me because LSU can run the ball. LSU has a quarterback who is an elite runner. Against even A&M, where they didn't score a lot of points, Jaden Daniels ran for 7 yards an attempt. Overall, they almost ran for 6 yards an attempt, almost 200 yards. But Daniels at 5.4 yards per attempt passing the ball, that is very confusing to me, Josh, when I see a team that's got a number of good running backs, a great running quarterback, and yet the efficiency number is pretty low, and you'd think that defenses would be set up to give up an 8+ number from Jaden Daniels. Speaking of championship week, we got a championship clothing line, Bird Dawgs. It's sponsoring the College Football Nerds for 2022, and I'm going to talk about shorts because I work from home, so I don't have to wear pants that much. I do wear Bird Dawgs pants when I go travel for work, which is rare. I'm going to do a little product demo, but not like Josh who gave you all the booty. I'm just showing you the pants or the shorts so I can show you this liner. I can show you how good they look. And Josh, I love the shorts. I work out in them all the time. I wear them. I honestly, I know this is silly. I sleep in them. I work in them. I work out in them. Multiple pairs. And Bird Dawgs sent us some product, just full disclosure, but the joke's on them. I already had a bunch of Bird Dawgs stuff. But you're president business. You're an attorney. So you have to wear pants. It's kind of a requirement when you go into the office. So talk about Bird Dawgs in the pants department.
Well, you say that, I normally don't wear pants, but Bird Dawgs have been so comfortable that I can't help but wear them, and I'm wearing them, right now. So yeah, they're comfy. They've got pants that are professional slacks. They've got joggers. Kind of wearing the joggers right now, chilling behind the camera, and I mean it's hard to fault them. They're cheaper than Lululemon. I think they're just as good quality, and they fit well for men. So it's definitely been a good product.
So go to birddogs.com, enter promo code NERDS, used to be CFB Nerds, but NERDS, and that's 2 Ds, birddogs.com. They'll throw in a free Bird Dogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, promo code NERDS, and boom, free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs. The most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You will not want to take these things off. I promise you.
It is confusing, and there's a lot of pieces there that would seem to make it work well, right? I think Neighbors is a great receiver. I think Pute has the potential to be an excellent receiver. It hasn't shown up at times. Even you talk tight ends at Besh, they've got a good guy. They've got a really good young player in Brian Thomas Jr. There's talent up and down that roster. Emery is a good receiver out of the backfield. Kane is a very experienced back that can be effective in the passing game. Why are you not throwing the ball well? And the thing I'll emphasize, it's not a one-off. Okay, if you go down and you look at games 6.6 yards per attempt or less, they have had in P5 competition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. And yeah, we're on the conference championship game, so half your games were 6 yards per attempt or less. And we say 7.5 is a competent passing game, 8.5 is effective. So your average game is 7.4 yards per attempt. They don't average a competent passing offense. They've had some great numbers in a couple games where they really were able to play against inferior defenses. Florida was one, New Mexico was another, and it's kind of the only reason the numbers are boosted. But there's clearly problems. Personally, I think it's a combination of factors. I think at this point you have to just accept that Jaden Daniels is not a very effective quarterback throwing the football. I think he's intelligent and he understands what he's supposed to be doing pretty well. He's very good at throwing, throwing hot against the blitz, that kind of thing. But if you're able to get pressure and play them honestly, he doesn't do a good job of finding the open guy, throwing to a tight window. And I really start to wonder, given what Notre Dame was like under Kelly, if the scheme itself is just a little too pro, maybe for college, is a little too difficult. If guys can't really get open consistently enough, they can't get the timing down enough. It seems like everything's really hard in the passing game. So yeah, I agree with you, and it's reflected. I'll say one of the major metrics we like to talk about sometimes: offensive points per drive. And this is from Brian Fremeau, FEI, produces this stat, but I think it's a pretty useful one. Per drive, Georgia 3.53 points per drive. They average over a field goal per drive. I'll note that's ahead of Alabama at 3.21 points per drive. They just play fewer drives because their tempo is slower. LSU's not great. I mean, it's 2.84 yards per drive, 23rd in the country, where Georgia's 7th. It's a reasonably good offense, but the passing game is clearly a limiter for LSU. It's confusing to talk about why that is the case, and it's obviously something that bit them pretty hard in that Texas A&M game where they failed to score 24 points.
I agree with you, and I've noticed this a number of times this year. And LSU fans don't want to hear this because they don't like the comparison, but it feels a lot like Jimbo Fisher's offense has felt some this year with his, three quarterbacks, but a lot in previous years where everything's drawn up perfectly, but it requires the perfect boundary throw. And if you hit it, it's deadly. But if you don't, then, which is most of the time, then you're having 3 and outs. And even last night, there was a touchdown that was dropped in the back corner of the end zone that was a perfect throw from Daniels, but it required a perfect throw and a perfect read and perfect protection. He hit that against Alabama in pretty decent coverage. Alabama defended it pretty well, but it was a perfect throw, and he hit it. Last night, the ball was even there, but everything had to go perfectly, and the defender was able to get a hand on the ball. I think that you're onto something here, and that it followed Brian Kelly, even though the OC didn't. That there's something about what he wants from his offense and his quarterbacks that requires a lot of proness, and it doesn't take advantage of the college game and the tempo and the creativity that you see from a lot of the better play callers, and it requires you to do everything perfectly, and I don't love that. But maybe the numbers show something different right now, and we don't do this a lot, but I want to talk about this relative to the model. The point spread right now is 16 and a half. I think it opened at 17 and a half, but it's somewhere in that number, which is huge, even for Georgia versus LSU this year. Maybe it's partly because Daniels was banged up a little bit, maybe not. But what does the model say? And off of that, maybe give your opinions on what this Vegas number is.
Sure. So the model in this game, go ahead and throw it out there. It has Georgia 27, LSU 17. When we look at some of the statistics that it generates that kind of help us figure out, how to evaluate the two teams, the defensive statistics are good, not necessarily crazy good. Georgia 71% against the run, 78% against the pass. Look, those are very good numbers, but they're not elite. I went ahead and pulled the model from last year's conference championship game. Georgia went into that game allowing 55% against the run, 72% against the pass. Alabama last year was 61% against the run going into the conference championship game. So Georgia's kind of really like a tier and a half worse. They're still very good, but not the world beaters they were a season ago. LSU's numbers are just merely good. 81% against the run is good. Again, you can get that run defense number pretty low if you're a good defense. It's not that unusual to do. 96% against the pass really isn't very particularly impressive. Georgia is more balanced to a large degree than LSU. Georgia actually throws more than they run. I think we were the first ones to note the statistic. We did it in our preview, and everybody picked up on it. I think even in the CBS broadcast, it made me proud because we talked about it and tweeted about it. That Tennessee, when they played Georgia, Tennessee was a team that ran more than they threw, and Georgia was a team that threw more than they ran, which is totally the opposite of what I think a lot of people perceived. But LSU does run a fair clip more than they throw. So, again, you get better yard per play numbers out of the pass than you do the run. And we already talked a bit about the sort of correlation between the more you throw, the lower that number goes. So if you can maintain over 8.5 yards per attempt, which Georgia has been doing at a high volume, you tend to have a pretty good advantage. And that shows up in the yardage here at 6.45 yard per play for Georgia, 4.45 for LSU. And so, 17, anytime you get below 20 points, it's just hard to hold teams to below that. There's kind of a floor in football because it just takes one drive or one play to score points, one fumble. It's just really hard. Georgia at 27 is sort of in the functional offense number. LSU at 17 is really 4.5 yards per play really isn't functionally offensively. And so that's where it is. And I'll go ahead and talk about the Vegas number now that I've said that latter point. LSU may only be a 10-point dog in our model, but the per play numbers are kind of concerning because that's indicating that LSU may not really be functional. And if you look at Georgia this year and how their games have gone, they've struggled to blow out teams when the other team can move the football enough to kind of disrupt rhythm, to keep the Georgia defense on the field and their defense off the field. If you get into a game where you get a lot of 3-and-outs, Georgia plays possession football. I mean, Kirby Smart believes in ball control. I think there's some flaws to that long term, but this is probably a good year for it. Last year probably was to a certain extent too. That style of football, if you can just stone a team over and over again, it wears on them. And eventually their defense gives out because they're on the field too much. And it may not even be that many plays, but they're just on the field constantly. And eventually they cave. And Georgia's offense is a very high efficiency offense. Again, I've already noted their per possession scoring is actually quite good. And they'll start to run away with it. And the other problem you mentioned was the injury to Daniels. We already talked about the yard per attempt numbers from LSU not being great. But the thing that I would really emphasize, if you look at LSU and where their rushing numbers have come from, it has been in large part Jaden Daniels that's carrying the load. I mean, against Texas A&M, Daniels had 84 yards rushing, was the leading ball carrier in terms of carries, in terms of yards. And so, if he can't really run as a function of the offense, that's going to really limit what LSU can do offensively. And I think it makes him far more vulnerable to the pass rush because he's so mobile, teams can't really properly rush him. And if he can't really run well, they're going to be able to rush him and be a lot more aggressive. And suddenly that LSU score, I think this game looks more like 27-10 than 27-17. And yeah, that's where I think the Vegas number's coming from, is probably expecting LSU to score very, very few points in this ball game.
So Jaden being healthy, not healthy, we don't know. That's a hypothetical. I don't really want to talk about hypotheticals. Instead, I want to talk about the hypothetical of what might have been going on with LSU Saturday night. And this is something that I think Georgia fans really need to consider and not roll their eyes, because that's kind of the natural inclination. I think it's very possible two things happened Saturday night. One, this is not just possible, this is reality if you have eyeballs. A&M finally played to their potential. And this is the big criticism I have of Jimbo Fisher's system, is that, like, yes, it can be deadly and awesome and elite, and you can beat any team in the country with it, but it's got to be perfect. I think it was close to perfect Saturday night. LSU played good defense. Like, Moose caught a touchdown in the end zone in bracketed, basically, coverage. Safety was over the top, had a corner right on him, caught it with one hand, perfect pass. Like, it required all those things to happen, scored a touchdown. There was a lot of that going on. Everything was clicking. I think we saw A&M finally play to their talent potential in a way that we haven't seen all night. So everybody's looking at that ranking, or the record of A&M, saying, oh, they're 4-8 or whatever, and making fun of LSU for losing this game. But I think A&M came to play with nothing to lose and played out of their minds, a lot of like they did against Alabama last year, and we never saw it for the rest of the season, right? I think that's one thing. The other thing is the hypothetical, really, in that I think it's very possible that LSU was sleeping on A&M and started prepping early for the Georgia game, for the SEC championship game. I think there's some precedent for this. Like, I truly in my heart believe that 2020 Ohio State completely skipped prep for Northwestern and was loading up on Clemson, and that's why they looked so dominant against Clemson and looked so bad against a pretty pedestrian Northwestern team in the conference championship game. I think this happens a lot. I think it happened last year with Florida and LSU. I think this happens a lot. So that's a possibility. Josh, one, do you think that's a possibility? And two, if that is a possibility and Daniels is healthy, might we see a much more competitive game than maybe people are thinking they're going to see on Saturday?
Yeah, and I know you were thinking it 2 years ago with the Florida game. That's when they held Kyle Pitts out against LSU.
Sorry, 2 years ago.
Yeah, and they but that was because they knew they had to beat Alabama if they wanted to hit all their goals. So there was a lot of reasons to think they did that and thought they would walk over LSU, and they didn't, because LSU was a much better team at the end of 2020 than they were to start, and Florida probably had a lot of arrogance there. I don't know. I don't know that I totally buy that LSU was just looking forward. It doesn't seem Brian Kelly's style to do that. There may be something to be said that they were starting to work on concepts for Georgia. There were also concepts for Texas A&M. And, the teams do that a lot where if there's something that's going to be applicable to the next two teams they play, they focus on that harder than other things that are unique to their opponent if they think they're an inferior opponent. I actually think there's a lot of other factors at play, one of which is the real slump for A&M came when they had quarterback injuries. Then A-Chain got the flu, and then he was out. I think the perception for A&M, not that they were thought to be a good team, but it really tanked when they lost that game to Auburn 10-13. And that was a game where they were out 2 or 3 starting receivers. They were out A-Chain. They were out, I think, 3 starting quarterbacks. That wasn't who LSU played. And I don't think people understand the difference that having Muhammad has for Texas A&M, obviously. That Wegman has had some time to get up to speed. Having A-Chain back and healthy is a massive difference in that offense. He had the flu versus Florida, got hurt, didn't play versus Auburn, didn't play versus UMass when they won 20-3, which is probably the worst team in college football, and you beat them 20-3. So yeah, it was just a different team. There's a lot going on there. It wouldn't shock me, want to spin it the other way. Texas A&M had every reason not to really practice for UMass. They're so bad that you probably don't need to. And it wouldn't shock me if that was a 20-3 game just because they were putting all their eggs in the LSU basket. But that's what happens when you get the target on your back, and teams run into that a lot. And I think that's, there's a reason teams are 1 or number 2 and they lose frequently, or there's years where number 2 will go down 5 weeks in a row. It's because once you get that target, teams put extra energy and effort. And look, these are college kids. They've got lives. They go do stuff. They got girlfriends. But when they play number 2, when they play a team that's going to win their division, they actually go watch film every night that week. They put an extra hour and a half every night, and it shows up because you only get a few days of practice for each team on the schedule. And if guys are putting in a lot of extra time in a given week, it makes a tremendous difference in college football, which also, something that's unique to regular season games versus bowls. So yeah, I think it's possible, but the big thing I'll say here is with LSU and Georgia now playing each other, there's, it goes both ways. I'll end with a point that Georgia Tech was a really bad opponent. Georgia struggled for about half of that game. I don't take it for granted that Georgia didn't load up looking ahead to LSU. It's just they happen to be playing a much more inferior opponent. Yes, Georgia Tech is significantly inferior to Texas A&M, and then they could get away with it. So even if that is true, I don't necessarily know that it's going to be an edge, because I do believe Georgia was probably looking ahead and could afford to.
All right, I want to give my pick on this one. We said we were going to go 15. Looks like we might go 30. I think that a lot of people overreact in these situations where they think that the team looks bad heading into the game, and therefore they're going to get blown out. We did this with Michigan. They looked bad heading into after the Illinois game, heading into the Ohio State game. We picked Ohio State to win pretty comfortably. I think Georgia's number 1 team in the country. I don't think an LSU team with nothing to lose is an easy out. And I think that Saturday against A&M, even though they didn't have the division to lose, they had a lot more to lose perceptually and everything else that A&M didn't have. I don't think Georgia covers this if Daniels is healthy. If he's not healthy, it's going to be KJ Jefferson last year, where they had won some good games heading into the Georgia game. Jefferson, without his ability to run last year, wasn't a great quarterback. Come in with a bum ankle, and Georgia beat him like 37-0. If Daniels is hurt in a way that he's not mobile, Georgia blows him out. But if he's healthy, give me Georgia 34. Actually, a little lower. Give me Georgia 27, LSU 17.
See, the reports I've seen have said that, well, there's a high probability that Daniels will practice Tuesday. And when I saw that, I kind of raised my eyebrow, because I think he's going to play. I think he's going to be maybe somewhat healthy. I don't think he's going to be 100% healthy. And you need him 100% healthy to move the ball, because LSU's offense has not been overly effective this season. And so given that this Georgia defense is the best defense in the conference, probably by maybe some margin, depending on the day with where Alabama chooses to show up or not show up, as it appears. Yeah, I think this game actually could get quite ugly. I have Georgia in this one 34-13. I think this is a bad matchup for LSU. I don't think LSU's depth has done well against teams that can run. They do well against the run when the starters can get in there and you're stopping the run sporadically. But once teams start moving the ball down the field, then you have to rotate, and then the depth gives out. They've got good pass rushers in Ojulari and Gay, but they're not huge guys. They're not really great against the run on the edge. They're serviceable. I'm not saying they're bad, but they're not elite run stoppers. Wingo's been a guy that's been a surprise, but when they lost Mason Smith, it really killed the depth. And I think that could be a problem in this game because I think Georgia is going to largely stop LSU's offense. And I think this one's just going to snowball. A lot like a lot of Georgia games, close for a while, and then they pull away. When they pull away, I don't think LSU is going to be in a good spot when they've got to throw to win, and it could get away from them pretty badly.
All right, y'all, that's it for us on Georgia LSU. Let us know in the comments what you think the score is going to be. Remember, like and subscribe. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.